Today's Blind Side features an archive of an episode of BBC Radio 4's Late Night Women's Hour from December 2018. It's entitled Men and Feminism, and I've picked it out for prosperity because I think it makes interesting listening for anyone concerned about considering concepts such as human rights and gendered inequalities from the perspective of boys and men. For the uninitiated, Late Night Women's Hour is a looser, younger, more conversational version of the BBC's now 70-year-old magazine show, where each episode a panel of women are invited to discuss one specific issue or theme. Ostensibly, as the title suggests, this episode's big issue is getting men into feminism, but from another perspective it could just as easily have been called getting feminists into men's issues. Because in my humble subjective opinion, for a conversation about men and feminism, all three guest panel members actually bring refreshingly informed, empathetic and relatively non-judgmental perspectives to the table. Indeed, one of a number of significant moments to look out for is the bit where Rana Rahimpour, the BBC World Service's senior Iranian correspondent, confesses that she's glad she's not a man because from her perspective, it's a hard life to be a man. Bear in mind, this is coming from a woman who spent the first 25 years of her life living in Tehran. In fairness, it is highly unlikely that you'll learn anything new about men's issues during the episode's 23-minute runtime. Predictably, the entire conversation is informed by polarising concepts like privilege, patriarchy and toxic masculinity. And apparently it didn't occur to the show's producers that it might have been interesting to have included a contribution from at least one actual man. But with all that said, the main reason I bring this episode to your attention is actually show host Emma Barnett's contribution to the conversation and how hilariously out of touch, ill-informed and frankly chauvinistic she comes across in comparison to all three of her guests, at least from the perspective of a man like me. Anyway, I'll leave you to make your own mind up, but in particular keep an ear out for the moment where, in the interest of BBC balance, she offers a fairly robust opinion about a certain Canadian that moments earlier she'd established she clearly knew very little about.
Welcome to Late Night Women's Hour with me, Emma Barnett. This is the programme and podcast where we bring to you the thoughts, views and musings of an esteemed panel. Free to roam and say whatever they please. Today, around the table, let me introduce you then to our band of sisters. We have Farah Storr, Editor-in-Chief of Cosmopolitan magazine and author, Rana Rahimpour, BBC journalist and broadcaster specialising in Iran, and Emma Gannon, podcaster and author. Emma, getting men into feminism, why do we need to bother?
I've noticed that for so long it's been a joke saying we need to talk about men. It was like, men have had their time. International Men's Day doesn't exist. Every day is Men's Day. Go away, men. Let's talk about women. And I think we've been doing that for the last, well, I don't know how long, but since like Caitlin Moran's book, for example, How to Be a Woman, there's been this new conversation about women. It's been brilliant. But
I'd just like to point out, for more than 70 years, Woman's Hour, upon which you are appearing, has also been part of that.
Also, I've got the 75-year anniversary book, I might say. Obviously, yeah, we've been talking about women for a long time, and that's great. But I've noticed that I personally am only talking to women. I feel like some magazines are only talking to women. Some events, all women panel, all women in the room. How is that furthering a movement for equality when we're not talking to half of the world? And I find it really not great to exclude men from this conversation because they have their own issues. They have so many issues. But yeah, I just think now it's time to talk about men. And I think that was an unpopular opinion for a long time. People saying, why are we talking about privileged men? Why are we putting any focus on them at all? They've had the focus. They've had all of the commissions for all of the films. They've had all of the history, all of the stories, all of the books. Everything's been about men. But I think...
Are you specifically wanting to talk to men about women and the lack of equality, or are you wanting to talk to men about their issues?
I think both. I think it's getting more men to events talking about what feminism is, for example. There's still not enough men going.
Why on earth would they give up their evening to do that? I mean, what is it for
include
them?
Include them and make them want to come. Make something appealing to them.
Like give them sweets? I mean, seriously.
No, but I think then talk about men's issues in these events. Don't make them all female.
That weird little wine was Farah. Do you want to follow up on that?
No, I think Emma is right, actually. I think
Which Emma?
The Emma Gannon episode. I don't think you have to bribe them with sweets, so it would probably help. I think what they want at the moment is a sense of belonging. I think belonging.
They want to come. They actually want to come. I know so many men who feel left out.
A lot of men are not speaking up. They are frightened of retaliation, and I think you're right. I think, one of the things that's brilliant about women is, and again, generally speaking, because people go, well, not all women are like that, of course, is that it's, one of our brilliant things is empathy, and it's about including everybody. And so actually, exactly, you've got to have a conversation with men in it. I do feel men, look at the popularity of Dr. Jordan Peterson. He is selling out arenas.
Say who he is?
He is quite. He is seen as very controversial in that he has some very strong opinions on a lot of things. But he uses data. But one of his things is he talks about the role of men. He talks about groupthink a lot. Actually,
we could possibly call him an American provocateur.
He's Canadian, actually.
Is he? Excuse me.
Yeah, he's Canadian.
ignorance.
Yeah, and
Canadian.
he is seen, and I think because he has an alt-right following, people say, oh, he's alt-right. He's actually not alt-right. He happens to have. Alt-right people, I'm sure a lot of comedians have alt-right followers, but he has become he's kind of stepped forward for men and said men are in pain, this is what they're going through at the moment. And it's weird because he's this kind of nerdy professor from Canada, and it's taken him to come out.
Some people think of him as an arsehole.
A lot of people think of him as an arsehole.
Just countering the other view.
Yeah, a lot of people do. And to that I would say he's got about 600 hours of videos on YouTube. Go through it all, look at it, and then make an assessment. But I think it's really interesting that he is selling out arenas because men feel they don't have a voice, and so this nerdy professor has stepped up and said, "I'm going to be the voice," because a lot of men are scared about being demonised, and look what's happened.
And that's more dangerous having
they're scared of being
divided like that.
Totally.
Why are we not having?
That's where true misogyny lies. You take them out of the equation. 10 years down the line, men are really going to get resentful. And that's my worry is, if you make men feel so uncomfortable, they'll hit back in 10, 20 years' time.
And the litmus test is find your most liberal, laid-back, cool, friendly guy friend. If he even feels left out right now, we have a major problem. We're not involving them in anything.
But hang on, are they not feeling left out because they're losing their privilege?
No, I think they just genuinely feel like they're not invited to anything.
Well, you don't know for sure, though, do you?
It's a group thing again. Some of them might. A lot of them don't. So again, we're kind of demonising men.
No, but hang on. I'm sorry. There's two things going on here. There's the issue of talking to them about their issues, and actually we're going to come on to, Rana, in just a moment, what you think we should be talking about specifically to men. And then there's talking to them about how women feel about their place in the world. And are you actually saying... I open this out to all of you. Are you saying that men feel left out of that conversation, or are you saying men feel left out of just talking about what's wrong for them in society?
I think both.
Yeah, I think both.
I think
both.
Invite your male friends to an event next time you go, or to something, or even send an article. Like, just involve them in the dialogue and the conversation. That's one thing. And then the other thing is I think men as a whole need more role models, maybe, or more people talking about body image, talking about mental health, talking about being sensitive, all these things that men aren't allowed to do. I just think we need to, I think Caitlin Moran actually said she wants to write How to Be a Man or something. Just let's kind of talk about that as well. And I also think we need to talk about being a man as a more intersectional thing. Men in suits, white, powerful men, yeah, fine. Like, let's not talk about them all the time. But what about race, gender? What about all of the different spectrums of being a man? Lots of men have no privilege when it comes to the spectrum. So, I don't know. I just think we should work men more.
All white men in suits are not all the same. They are, it goes back to individuals. They're all very different. And some of them, if you are saying you don't get to come into this conversation, that's a really dangerous thing to do to any group, actually. I think that's the point.
There's probably more going on under the surface there. They probably need more conversation.
And I think it's important to get them involved because, like it or not, still the majority of decision makers in the world are men. And unless we get them involved with our issues and worries that many feminists have, it's not going to change. Unless they feel they're involved and they're aware of what we're talking about and where we're coming from, we won't be able to change much.
But, if you were listening to a previous episode of us all talking together, Rana, you admitted you yourself have judged women as to be less capable than men. there is this phenomenon called nice guy misogyny. This idea that some men can be very nice to women's faces, get on with them, buy them a drink down the pub, but privately would never promote them, privately don't rate them as well as they rate their male colleagues. And that's often based on their domestic setup. It's based on the fact that they see their wives or other half fall out of the workplace once they have their children, and they see them as homemakers. They'll never advertise those views. You can't legislate against private views. So what I'm asking, Rana, to you first and then open it out, is really going to a panel event where somebody's talking about feminism or how women really feel, making them feel included enough to come to that. Won't it really just come down to someone that they know and love actually convincing them to change their view, rather than going to these sorts of debates like it came down to your husband to convince you to have a female photographer on your wedding day and not a male one?
But what's the alternative? If we don't invite them to those events and talks, what else can we do?
But no one's not... tell me if I'm wrong, but is anyone blocking men from events?
No, there are events.
They're advertised as being for women, though.
Yes.
Like, it is sort of unsaid.
What events? Give me an example.
I mean, look, this might be London-centric. It probably is, and also work in the media. But a lot of events, if it's an all-female panel, for example, it's just going to be come and talk about women's stuff. That's what it is. That's what it says on the tin. And I don't know any man that would just rock up and sit at the back and go, take notes. I think it needs to be just like a cultural shift of bring your male friends, bring your boyfriend, just bring people. Because this, I took my boyfriend to a Laura Bates talk. She wrote Everyday Sexism. The stats that woman knows about rape culture is horrific. He sat there going, I didn't know any of this. I knew it all because we read all the same magazines here. We all know these stats. Some men really don't know them, and I think it's just waking up to it.
And that's an important... I mean, millions of men listen to Women's Hour. It's always been thus. Read things that, actually reading and listening rather than attending things has always been open. So you could argue that there is a lot of material out there that is fully open, but you think it needs to be more going the other way now. It has been closed off. I also wondered, though, what's in it for men? Because although it might be good for them to hear it, and I do want to know really what you think on that, because I've been reading and writing quite a lot about periods lately, and it's always really interesting to tell a man that you're writing a book about menstruation. Range of views from women. But I started to come to the conclusion that specifically on something like that, which does expressly affect women, it's not in men's interest to go around and change the taboo or change how people feel about it, because they just can't understand. So where there is a lack of empathy, you talked about empathy, Farah, is it women, sadly, that just have to have another job to do all that work? Or do you think you can bring men into it?
What, into conversations about periods?
Not conversations, actually stopping it from being a taboo with other men and other women. So it doesn't have to just be about periods, but it was on my mind as something that just has to probably be women that deal with it.
No, I don't think so, actually. But I think you probably need to. I think it goes back to, and of course it goes back to, do men want to do it? So there'll be some men who will go, I'm just not up for that. And that's also okay. But there are some men, I mean, actually, we're talking about the women's only events. I'm not talking about women's only events, actually. I'm talking about, just for 1 minute to go back to that, about... I've been to a number of events where, and Laura Bates is good because she uses data, and you can't argue with data, but a lot of events where you have people making these outlandish comments based on emotion and nothing more, or based on personal experience, making outlandish comments about men in general. And I think whilst men are invited to these things, of course it's open to whoever, would you want to sit there while your whole sex is demonised? I wouldn't. So that's where I find it slightly problematic. It's not about being women only. It's about, and I hate the term safe space. I'm not a fan of it. However, I think if you are going to, if I went to a men's event and they were demonising women, going, women are this, women are that, I wouldn't feel comfortable, and you would shut me off from the conversation.
But isn't it about actual changes? And I'll give you another example rather than talking in the abstract, which is why I asked about if there were specific events you were thinking of. So I've just come back to work from maternity leave. My husband's just started shared parental leave. 0.2% of men in this country have taken that up since it launched in 2015 under the coalition government. Two amazing things happened as a result of that. One, he now understands what I've been doing for the last 9 months, day in, day out. So there's an empathy level, exactly what we're talking about. But two was the moment when he turned around to me and said, well, how am I going to tell my boss?
There is such a stigma around
Is it going to have an effect on my trajectory, my career? I was like, welcome to my world. Like, as in, seriously, that one moment. And so I use it as an example. And his boss has been incredibly supportive. But he's been, I have to say, extremely fortunate in that respect, because I do know that's not the case for a lot of people, or they'd be too scared to try, which is why eventually we might move to a Scandi model where you have to take it, otherwise you'll be financially penalised. But what I was trying to say with that is, you actually need things to change or something to happen in society where you have to take the plunge, where there's something actionable almost for men to almost be in the same water, in the same pool as the women in some way, or vice versa. Because I think until you have those moments, you don't get cultural change.
Yeah, you have to enforce some things. I think you do have to enforce certain things. Yeah.
I know it's anecdotal, but I know quite a lot of men recently who have said they want to take paternity leave, and some of their male bosses have said, maybe you should go and get therapy. That's really strange that you want to spend that much time at home. Like people think something's wrong with the man if the man wants to help out in the home. That, I think, that is where the stigma is of like the lad culture or the banter in the workplace. If it's toxic masculinity holding a lot of men back.
Yes, and I think that's. Well, I hadn't heard the therapy thing before. That's amazing. That's awful. Have they taken them up on it? Cost the company some money? I would.
I hope so.
just to see. I've got a terrible boss and I'd like to talk about it.
But enforcing things is very important, actually, because in a lot of these tech companies, and as the voice of the internet, you'll probably correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of them have Emma Gannon, not Emma Barnett.
Yeah, definitely not.
They have these unlimited holidays. Oh my God, unlimited holidays. And we were talking in my office about, would you guys like it? And every single person, including me, went, absolutely not, because you wouldn't do it. And that's why we love having enforced holidays. So I do think for real change, you do have to enforce.
You have to make people take it. It's a bit like free food at the office and beds in those sorts of companies, because then you never go home. You never need
What's
to.
What's really behind those beds and dry cleaning?
A perk. Freeze your eggs. Never have to leave the office.
There's a string attached to every one of those perks.
The cynicism. In terms of then going to the other side of this, which is not just getting men into thinking about what women are going through, but what men are actually going through. Rana, I know you wanted to say something on that.
Yes, I started to thinking about it because of International Men's Day, and I saw some statistics that still suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50. Which is huge.
And International Men's Day on the day we're recording was yesterday, I should say.
I wrote something about it on my Instagram, and I said that still only 1 out of 4 men find it easy to talk about their feelings. They don't feel comfortable at all. And the feedback I received was astonishing. So many men wrote to me and they said, thank you so much for finally talking about us. They said, one of them said, I don't want to be the breadwinner. Mm-hmm. And I have to. And I'm tired of being treated as this money-making machine. And I'm not allowed to say that I don't want this role.
And actually, just to build on that, based on what we were saying, and do carry on, is there are women who will not share their maternity leave. Now, I find that fascinating. I've met a lot of them who are like, oh, you've given away 4 months? You've given away what? Why would you do that? I just wouldn't do that. And I thought, well, actually, that's selfish in its own right, isn't it? In another way, that you won't share. That's the other side of this. And that leaves this enormous pressure, this unspoken pressure for the man to just keep going out to earn the money for both of you at that time. Now, I'm not going to win myself any fans for saying that, especially because some of the women
didn't go through the bodily changes, though.
No. And so when he did say to me the other day, I mean, you've got a lot of clothes, I did give him an icy look, which is to say, yes, most of them don't fit me right now. And he was like, I couldn't possibly comment on that. Sorry, I've digressed into my my waistline.
But then there is this pressure. Much men want to talk about. There's so much social pressure. We always talk about the social pressure on women to be thin, to look perfect, to be a good mum, to be good at their jobs. There's a lot of pressure on men. They also feel that they have to earn well. They have to have a nice house. They have to have a six-pack. There's a lot of pressure that not many of us are talking about. And I thought maybe it's time.
They necessarily don't talk to each other about as well, because there's that statistic, I've now forgotten what it actually is, but that men who have women in their lives in a strong way or some kind of way live longer because women make them go to the doctor. Right. Which is, I see that all around me, especially with some of the older men in our family. They would literally just crumble on till they died, and it's like not asking for help with directions. I'm generalising, but they don't want to ask for any help, and then so they don't talk to each other, and they don't necessarily talk to women. which is a problem, isn't it?
It is a problem. And then it made me think about how can I create this safe environment for men in my life, my husband, my son, to feel that they can be themselves and they can talk about their worries and they don't have to suppress their emotions. And I thought this is a conversation that all of us should start having. And how can we help them?
Emma?
I think it's so important, but I also think that we need to acknowledge that there is still an imbalance there with the body image stuff. For example, yes, men, are unhealthy or go to the gym too much, or they are stressed out about their body in different ways. But I don't think men are judged as harshly from their appearance, and it's almost like I feel like that needs to be acknowledged. Like Philip Green isn't in the Daily Mail with people going, he has a muffin top. It's women.
He's in there for a different reason.
Yeah. If that was his only problem, he'd be fine. But
let's just keep it at that. The lawyers aren't on to me yet. Go on.
But I just think as much as we do need to talk about men and all of their issues, we can also acknowledge that women have been oppressed for much, much longer. Or does that make it sound like I'm just having levels of oppression?
But it's not a battle for oppression. It's not who's had it worse, I don't think. It's about what's the right thing to do now. And the right thing at the moment is... it appears as though some of our men, some of our younger men, and older men actually, because I think I think it's in 40s men are at real crisis point with suicides. And isn't it, I think more women attempt suicide, but more men are successful because they get to a point where they have not spoken to anyone. But yeah, I don't think it's a battle about oppression, and I think that will hold us back, because I think if you get to that, I mean, someone recently said to me, we were talking about something completely different, but she said, as a woman of colour, you don't realise it, but you have been oppressed for years and years. I was getting on with my life okay. That's like mental assault, saying that to someone, because it's like, hang on a minute. I think levying someone with that can be dangerous. I don't think it is a battle for it.
Yeah, there isn't a competition.
No, I think
more
I think men are in pain, or they're about to go through. And actually, it's interesting with the body image, Emma, because actually, whoever watches Love Island, it was interesting how all the men's bodies were actually like these Greek statues. The women's were obviously the women were in wonderful shape, but the men's. So I think that is coming. I think in the next 10 to 20 years, they're going to be in crisis action. I think now is the time to start having these conversations with them.
I only mention it because I think that's what's holding back this conversation, is a lot of people think we don't need to talk about that. And I think we're still at that level of women, and we need to focus on women more. But I agree. I think men have so many issues they're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah,
holding that in is so dangerous.
What if there's a man who wants to wear makeup and still a man, but he feels so much pressure from society, or they want to wear skirts, but there's still, if you feel that you will be judged, it's just I'm glad I'm not a man. I think it's a hard life to be a man.
But the male idols, I mean, it's interesting. You only one name came up, Jordan Peterson. Some people would say that that's nowhere near the person who should be representing some of those struggles. And do they just not have enough of those people coming forward to say, you can live your life like this, you can not make it a war with women, you can make it about this, this and this. I mean, you have seen more, the other side of that confessionalism that we're seeing more and more from people, from high profile people, is that hopefully footballers or people in different sorts of jobs can appeal to different parts of society, not just rile them up politically, but actually talk to them about those issues. So maybe it's a lack of other men talking publicly.
Yeah. I think Rio Ferdinand's done quite a lot talking about the death of his wife, actually. And I think it also depends where you are. I think as a footballer, and we know all the stereotypes attached to that, seeing someone like him talk about the death, I think, actually, I didn't see it, but he was in tears on television. I mean, that was a very important moment. And I think, I think there needs to be more male role models and more men who feel they can come out and talk about these things without being demonised by other men.
Yeah, I remember Matt Haig. Matt Haig is a good voice on sort of being a man and what that means and mental health.
It's about Matt Haig, the author. Yeah.
Matt Haig, the author of Reasons to Stay Alive, who talks about suicide and talks about overcoming those thoughts. And he actually, a while ago, put on Twitter, I'm going to write a book about masculinity. And he got trolled, basically, to the point where he was like, I'm not going to write this book then. Right. The backlash of people going, we don't need another man talking about being a man. And I feel like that wasn't that long ago, and I really see a shift. International Men's Day, this was the first year that people weren't just making jokes another man's day. This was like, no, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, all those scary statistics. So hopefully it's changing.
We shall see. 3 women plus me talking about men. We've done it. We've started it. Everyone's welcome. Thank you very, very much.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.